Hello, and welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing podcast. This is the AMA episode. Just a reminder that these episodes are supported by my Patreon and by my clients. So if you enjoy the show and you're thinking about working with me, there are a variety of ways you can do that. You can get blocks of custom coaching through Camp for Human Performance. These are totally custom per person plans that include hours of contact time with me. I also have 2 plans coming out on the Sequence app in the next few weeks, which I will say more about soon. And finally, you can buy my technique course, The Principles of Problem Solving, also through Camp for Human Performance. And the Principles course is undergoing a long overdue overhaul of how it works. So I'm psyched to release that on its new platform later this year. If you have any questions about any of those things, feel free to send me a DM at Coach Jfire on Instagram or an email, coachjfire@gmail.com. If you want lots of bonus content, or you want to ask questions for the AMAs, or if you just want to support the show, you can also become a patron over at patreon.com/innerfireclimbing. Oh yeah, also, I guess we're 40 episodes in or something. Maybe give me a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It may shock you to learn that I am still basically a climbing coach and really not a podcast professional, but I know that's something that podcast people say. So, all right, on with the questions. Okay, Anthony asks, "Hi Jesse, I was curious to hear your thoughts on balancing climbing outdoors with focused training. For example, for us in the Pacific Northwest, we have sporadic but prime temps in the winter, and I've had a hard time being consistent in my training when every other weekend I drop everything to rest and try to send outdoors. This problem becomes even more muddy in the summer where it's suboptimal but still climbable. With Charlie Schreiber releasing his new app, which seems to want you to sacrifice a full year without performance periods, I wanted to know if you've seen any success with approaches like these. In the long term, do you think it's worth climbing outdoors less to be more consistent and focused with your training, or is there a way you found to balance the two?" Yeah, it's kind of tricky. I think it depends a lot on where you live and your life, and probably where you're at in your climbing, sort of in your climbing progression, and also, what you want out of your climbing. So yeah, there's a lot of variables, a lot of context. I don't know anything about Charlie's app. Maybe I should look into that, but I would, knowing Charlie and how much he climbs outside, and, the fact that he is a serious coach, I would be kind of surprised if there was a program that told you not to climb outside, or not to try to perform for a whole year. That sounds kind of interesting. I certainly wouldn't do that. That would be like, going to a tennis player and telling them that they should just work on their serve and not play a tennis game for an entire year. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Consistency is king. And if you mostly want to go climb outside and climb harder things outside, then you shouldn't be turning down opportunities to climb outside, right? Now, that has to be balanced against the other stuff that you have going on in your life. So for instance, for me, I used to just climb year round. I was always trip ready. I would go on big trips every season, and I would be climbing hard outside all the time. Even if it was too hot, I would still be out there trying to do the stuff that I could. And if you look through my logbook, please don't actually do this, but you would find a lot of boulders that were pretty hard for me at the time that I climbed in, July, August, September, mostly complaining on my logbook about how hard they felt, until I realized later that you could just wait until October. But I don't regret any of that, because I like being outside and I like climbing. And as long as you acknowledge that the conditions are not going to be amazing, it's a nice way to spend your time. You can still make a lot of huge and important gains in your movement and your tactics and just the way you think about your climbing, even if it's not perfect conditions. So that's one side of the coin. The other side is, like, for me, just because of age and the mileage of climbing I've done and how busy I am, seasonality is really helpful. So the way I think about it is I don't actually change how much I train or climb all that much. Those things change more based on how busy I am, or like what I have going on in my life. The season just determines like what I'm focused on. So in fall and spring, because I live near Leavenworth, like very close to it, I am prioritizing my climbing, and I'm doing what you said. I'm making space to rest so that I can have really good climbing days, even if that means that I'm going, weeks at a time between board sessions or lifting. I think this spring, because I have a new baby, I even went like a month without climbing on my home wall. Like, I didn't even warm up on my home wall. I just would go climb outside and warm up kind of in as fast a fashion as I could get away with. And that does result in detraining a little bit, but I don't regret it, because I would rather be outside. That's what I want to do with my life. So at a certain point, it's like, are you making a choice based on your climbing performance, or are you making a choice based on like your life and where you want to be and what makes you happy, So that's fall, spring. In summer and winter, I just generally prioritize my training a little bit over my climbing, but I'm still not going to like not go outside. So if I had an opportunity to go to North Bend or, Sasquatch or one of these areas that's not great conditions in the summer, but it's a little bit more tolerant of summer conditions, I'm going to choose to do that. Like I already said, I just like doing that. And climbing outside is the sport. So if you're into climbing outside, if that's the main thing that you want to do, you have to practice it. Gains that you make separately from that are probably not going to show up in a serious way. The only case I can think of for something like taking a whole year off of performance climbing, I guess I can think of two cases. Case number one would be you're going to do something like go work on an oil rig for a year, or go live abroad in a country that doesn't have any climbing or climbing gyms for a year. You're going on a mission to Cameroon or something. In which case, sure, taking your fingerboard and just training for a year, maybe you can make like some significant finger strength level up, right? But you're definitely not going to come out of that a better climber than you go into it. No way. The second case I could think of would be you're an extremely experienced outdoor climber, probably someone who's at my level, so like 100 plus double-digit boulders climbed. You're just familiar with a very wide swath of tactics and techniques, and you're basically never held back by understanding what move to do, but you're held back by your physical capacity to do those moves. And you have room in your life and a tremendous amount of patience, and you want to make a big physical unlock. Then I could see maybe reducing the amount of time that you spend outside significantly to just try to make more space in your life to recover from hard training. But that case basically perfectly describes me. I think actually if I had a big physical unlock, I could probably climb harder, but I would rather go climbing outside. There's no way at 39 that I'm taking a year away from climbing outside just to see if it makes me climb any harder. No way am I taking that gamble. I'd rather go climbing, man. And I'm pretty sure that going climbing is going to get me to climb harder anyway. So I hope that's useful. Thanks for the question. Okay, Rob asks, this may have already been discussed, but I'd be very interested to hear about pacing and breathing through a problem and how maybe this aligns with a mantra. I feel it's a constant game of adjusting my mind to what works at the time. More specifically, what thoughts are going through your head when climbing, and if none, how do you specifically achieve this? I find this perhaps more relevant to longer problems with more time to think. Thanks, Rob. Good question. I'll tell you kind of what works for me, but the thing that sticks out in your question is you said you feel like it's a constant game of adjusting your mind to what works at the time. And that could be a really good sign of like a mature athlete, in the sense that different problems or routes are going to require slightly different approaches. So you do want to have like tools in the toolbox to draw from. As an example that I think is relevant, Ethan Pringle has said this, and I agree with it, that if he sits and breathes for 2 minutes before he gets on the wall, he feels like he gets 2 minutes of value out of that, or 2 minutes of like flow potential. But if he's going to try a route, he wants to sit and breathe for, 10 minutes or something and really get into more of a state. I think he's even said that he's done longer, like 20 minutes. At that point, it's essentially like meditating before you get on the wall, right? And it would probably take quite a lot of practice for that to be really valuable as a ritual. I don't usually do 20 minutes. I would say 5 to 10 breaths is more my normal. But for a longer problem, it might take me longer to really get in the zone. And for a problem that's immediately extremely powerful, I might not do that process at all, because I'm really not trying to flow through like a dyno or something like that. I am trying to get like wired and psyched, and I'd be like jumping up and down and stuff like that. So you want to have those different tools in the toolbox and kind of know which one to reach for when. So that just should tackle the first part. As far as the pacing and breathing thing, you definitely should be visualizing your pacing. Your visualization might not be exactly the same time as the time it takes you to climb something, especially if you're talking about a sport route, because there's going to be parts of the route you want to probably gloss over in your visualization. If it's 80 moves long with who knows how many 100 plus foot moves, like just manually visualizing every single one of those would not be very efficient. So I wouldn't expect for a 20-minute route that your visualization is going to be 20 minutes. But for like an 8-move boulder problem, I think your visualization should be pretty tight to the pacing that you're actually going to do on the problem. And in that sense, when I see people visualizing, when I'm like coaching people outside, for instance, and they're just running through the sequence very quickly, I'm I would say I'm quite good at watching people do this and kind of thinking through their sequence with them and kind of managing whether they're actually remembering everything. And I think a lot of the time people are rushing it because they're just kind of trying to think about the facts of the climbing and they're not actually feeling how it feels in their body. So if you can get that pacing piece right, I think it's going to help with feeling like you're in that flow state kind of as soon as you start. And if you don't know what I mean by really feeling the moves, I call that tactile visualization. So an example would be if you're listening to this and you just pretend that I'm about to punch you in the stomach, you're going to squeeze your abs. Actually just did it subconsciously while talking. And you don't actually have to physically squeeze your abs, but if you know what it would feel like to do that, that is tactile visualization. I really encourage you to be doing that for all your climbing movement, kind of trying to feel how it's going to feel in your body. And you can choose to flex those muscles, sitting while you're visualizing, or you can choose not to flex them as long as you know in your mind what it's going to feel like to have them be active. And that is very important for understanding the sequence and really tightly connecting to your climbing movement. But it's also very important for breathing, because if you know what parts of your body are flexed or active, then it's going to be easier for you to tell like when you can breathe on the problem and what parts of your body you can breathe into, because you're very rarely going to have access to all of the possible lung capacity that you have while you're climbing, right? Especially if it's hard for you. You're just going to be squeezing parts of your torso and not be able to breathe super deeply. Okay, on to the last part of the question, because there's a lot here. You asked about what thoughts are going through my head while I'm climbing. I would say for me, if I'm climbing something hard, I basically shouldn't be thinking, to the point that if I hit a good hold and I can like hang out on that hold for a second, I even am trying to remain incredibly focused on how I'm relaxing, how I'm resting, how I'm maybe chalking up my hands, all those things, and not letting my mind get into some unclear state of like worrying about the outcome or thinking about the pads or thinking about my skin or something like that. Those would all be markers to me that I was having a less than ideal performance experience. And I've had some really negative climbing experiences where I did succeed, but I was thinking the whole time and things were not going the way that I wanted them to. I really am trying to get to a flow state with every hard boulder, and a flow state pretty much by demand does not include thinking. As far as the word mantra, which you used, I would say that is a thing you do before climbing, so during your breathing or at a rest point. Sometimes while I'm climbing, I'll employ like a specific cue for a single move, but that is a part of my sequence, a part of my visualization. That's not something I'm repeating to myself over and over while I'm climbing, like a mantra. And to this end, like, to go back to the breathing, I think all mindfulness practice helps with this. I think breathing in strength and conditioning, yoga, cardio, all those things, that all helps you to establish a connection to your breath and a solid understanding of the feelings that you're looking for in your body. Okay, this question is from Cian. Cian asks, how do you think using the font or V bouldering grades changes how people conceive of their climbing? I think there could be more nuanced or interesting examples, but one example is that since V points may not have a font scale analog, it's never occurred to me to have a 50 font points session or similar. Yeah, I definitely have thought about this before, and just, by virtue of the fact that V points are basic numbers, it's a lot easier to do math with them, or to try to do 100 in an hour, or to tally up how many points you do in a day. And, European climbers that I see, or I guess around the world really, uses the font scale. They're doing things like, I did this many 7th level or 8th level boulders on a trip or in a day or whatever it is. And then there's like 6C plus and 7B just don't exist in the V scale. So 6C plus is like between V5 and V6, and 7B is just between V7 and V8. And you'll see some people kind of try to shoehorn those font grades into the V scale. But if you have been to font like me, then it just kind of feels different. Like 7B and 7B plus are different things. So it really is like V7 and a half. It's not just a hard V7 or an easy V8. It's a separate thing, which just goes to show how ridiculous the grading scales are. I do know board climbers who use that to their advantage, like people who live in the States and primarily use the V scale when they're climbing outside or at the gym or whatever. But on their boards, they use the font scale because it makes it easier for them to keep that sort of progression or that sense of, quote, how hard they climb separate from their sense of how hard they climb outside or elsewhere. And so I kind of like that. Like when I went to Font and also when I was in Rocklands and other places like that, I don't really try to correspond things back to the V scale. I just try to climb things in that other scale and get a sense of that other scale because I'm in a different place anyway. So, the V scale is not even consistent from like Waco Tanks to Bishop to Joshua Tree, and those are only 1,000 miles apart from each other tops. So why would it be consistent if I took a different grading scale and translated it back to one from a different continent? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. Probably the most salient example is, so if you ask pretty much anyone who has been climbing for a while what like a high-end amateur would be, or if you ask a lot of people who are like weekend warriors, like what level they would want to get to. I know I've talked to a lot of people who are in this place in their climbing. They just want to climb V10 someday. That's like in America, a lot of people think V10 is kind of like where they can probably get. I do think that's starting to change now, but for the last like 10, 15, 20 years, V10 has kind of been held to a high standard, and it's been like a level that people are really keen on. And same thing goes on sport routes for 13A. Like a lot of people kind of feel like they can get to 13A. It's hard, kind of crazy hard actually, if you think about what you have to do for a 13A, but it's achievable for the average person. And so a lot of people are like, yeah, that's a nice round number, V10, 13A. Those are like good, good goals for me to aim towards. But then if you talk to European climbers, they feel the same way about where the font scale changes from 7 to 8. So 8A is kind of like the level that people want to get to. It's just not as cool to climb V9 as it is to climb V10. And it's just not as cool to climb 7C plus as it is to climb 8A. So I understand why people are like, they just want to get to that nice round number that signifies the beginning of the next tier. But 8A and V10 are not the same thing. 8A supposedly corresponds to V11. So it makes me wonder if European amateurs just hold themselves to like a slightly higher tier. And then same again for the sport grades. Like in Europe, or most of the rest of the world, really, people want to get to 8A because they use that other scale, and 8A corresponds supposedly to 13B. So it's just like the way that the grading scale is set up kind of changes the way that people perceive their progress or what they think they're capable of, even though, otherwise the populations are probably not crazy different because there's so many different climbers. It seems unlikely to me that people would all arrive at that same goal independently if the grading scales were, somehow not numeric in nature. If they were colors or something like that, I think it would be a lot less likely that everybody would kind of index on the same couple grades that they want to climb. So it definitely has something to do with the grading scales themselves. It's interesting to think about. I kind of think that this is what gyms that use circuit grading are like trying to play off of. They're trying to get people to not be as linear or as like prescriptive, I guess, about their progress by having people climb colors instead of numbers. But yeah, as I've exhausted elsewhere on the podcast, I'm not like a huge fan of that. Anyways, good question. Thanks, Cian. Okay, Jantina asks, I've been told that I chalk too often when I'm climbing routes and I could save energy by chalking less frequently. I've heard other climbers say they only chalk up when they start to feel like their fingers are slipping on holds, but that seems like leaving it too late. How often should you chalk up on routes? Obviously, this depends on the person, the route, and the conditions, but do you have general advice about chalking frequency? Yeah, I mean, I guess in theory, if you had good friction, there's no reason to chalk at all. So if you were truly like robotic and perfect climber, then you would only chalk up when you needed to for friction. But chalking is not a purely practical thing. It's also a habitual thing, a performance thing, it's a mental thing. So if we just take the robot example, then we can think about how that person would chalk up. And it's important to remember here that chalk does not increase your friction. Chalk reduces the amount of moisture that you have on your hands, and moisture reduces friction. But if you put a ton of chalk on your hands, that is also going to reduce friction. And if you don't believe me, just go get some super fine chalk and just coat your hands in it, like put way too much on your hands and then try to hang from a hangboard. You're going to slip. This is also why people blow the extra chalk off their hands after they chalk up, or why people will like pat their hand on their pants right after chalking up, which I know seems like a waste to some people. But what's happening there is people are just getting enough chalk on their hands to reduce the moisture, but not so much chalk that the chalk itself is reducing the friction. So if you're chalking up too much, then I would say the only downsides would be maybe that could correspond to like a bad choice of how to pace the route. So if you're stopping to chalk up and you're just sitting at a rest and you're chalking hands back and forth for, multiple turns of each hand, so you're there for like a minute or something, 2 minutes, and it doesn't make sense for you to rest in that place, well, then you're resting for too long. And you happen to be chalking up while you're resting, but that's a very different thing. So if your friends are telling you that your pacing is off or you're resting too much, then that's how I would perceive it. But if it's hot and you're just dipping a hand into a chalk bag in between every move or every few moves, but you're continuing to move up the route, that sounds to me like you're keeping the moisture low on your hands. And maybe the most important cue or thing that I noticed here is if you wait until your fingers are slipping, like you said, that's definitely too late. I mean, on the hard things that I climb, if I wait until my fingers are slipping, I'm falling. There's no slipping allowed on hard climbing. So it definitely makes sense to me, especially if it's hot out, to be chalking up pretty frequently. And maybe one other externality would be if you have dry skin like me, then using too much chalk can be a little bit of a risk in the sense that if I'm climbing and it's not hot and I'm chalking up too much, I can get my skin really, really dried out. So especially if I'm on a trip and I'm climbing like multiple days in a row, it just has a negative effect on my skin and I'll wind up with splits and stuff just because of the drying effects of the chalk. Definitely that's true with liquid chalk or alcohol on my hands as well. But I don't think that's a problem for the person who asked this question, and probably not a problem for most people, but something to think about. Yeah. In the end, I would pay more attention to your pacing and I'd pay attention to the friction that you have on the wall and I would adjust accordingly. But you're probably not chalking too much. It's probably one of those other things. Thanks for the question. Okay, Steven asks, I'm going to be spending a lot of time this summer in tent sleep, but I'm going solo. What are some of the best practices and or things to consider in trying to find others to climb with? Good question, which I don't think I've had on the pod before. So my first big international trip, I went to Thailand solo. First time leaving the country. First time going on a sport climbing trip, really. And I basically just brought my shoes, harness, chalk, and a very minimal amount of stuff to survive traveling. And I went for like 3 weeks. And I just assumed that I was going to meet lots of people. And I assumed that they would speak English. And I assumed that they would know how to belay. And I was right about basically all that stuff. I met lots of cool people. They all pretty much spoke English. Not going to be a problem in tent sleep unless you count rural English as not being English. And I feel good about your chances. Even in modern times, I think people are pretty inviting and friendly. And if you are inviting and friendly and you send the right signals, then you'll probably have a good time. So my advice would be plan to go climbing, preferably at popular crags. You're probably, if you don't have a partner for the day and you want to go climbing, you're going to need to spend proportionally a lot more time out at the crag than people who do have partners, because you kind of want to be there before other people and you may want to be, the last one there if you want to make sure that you get to climb on the things that you want to climb on. Unless you just get lucky and you link up with like a trio who could really use a fourth, or you link up with another traveling person who's solo. Those would kind of be the ideal things. You can also, that would be the old school method, to just kind of show up and like camp or hang out in the main areas and go hang out at the crag. The new school or digital method would be to use like Mountain Project, Facebook, Instagram, things like that, and use the partner finders on those websites, which I think can work as well. In either case, I think you want to be prepared to have like a really wide range of experiences, because some of the people that you're going to wind up linking up with are probably going to be way less experienced than you, and some of them could be way more experienced than you. And that might not always work out. If you're going and you're looking to get on 511 and there's somebody there who's solo, but they want to climb 514, those partnerships can work out. I've seen that happen before. But there are things about belaying for 514 that are very hard to just like learn on the fly in one day. And so you would need a very patient 514 climber to kind of show you the ropes of that, because you're not going to have had the benefit of belaying on 512 and 513 and seeing what those processes look like. And so I advise you to be patient with them as well, because you may have a corresponding experience where maybe you want to climb 512 and they want to climb 5.9 and they're a 5.9 belayer. Basically, you may need to teach the other person, you may need to learn from them more than you would with a partner that you already know, and you already know how they operate and what they're climbing on and stuff. And related to that, I would say with a new partner, maybe this is obvious, just stay well within your abilities at first. I would say, I would pay attention to how people are setting up to belay, like when you get started. I actually remember putting my gris-gris, I put the rope in the gris-gris backwards when I was about to belay this guy. I think he was from France, maybe. And I put the rope in the gris-gris backwards. He was getting ready to try to red point this route, and he asked me for a belay. And we, I'd been hanging out with his group, but I hadn't actually belayed him yet. And I put the rope in backwards, and he was just looking at me like, "Are you going to fucking drop me, bro?" And I was like, "Oh, wait, hold on." I fixed it. And I think he actually sent the route. It's a pretty badass climber, actually. But yeah, I had this moment of just being like, intensely embarrassed that I looked like I did not know what I was doing in front of this guy right when he was about to go for it. That would have been hard for me to feel like I was going for it when somebody had set up the gris-gris backwards. So don't do that. Maybe climb a 5-7 or something where you feel like you have time to hang out at the second bolt and communicate with them and see what they're doing. And, if you're going to get short roped, you want to be like ready to deal with that, all those kind of things. But it's pretty rare for those situations to be actually hazardous. Usually it's just learning, kind of the way the other person works and what they know how to do and stuff. And within a route or two, you will know if you want to keep climbing with that person for sure. I guess you can like rock, paper, scissors to decide who goes first, because you're not going to know each other. So other general advice, it can't hurt to show up at the campsite with a pack of beer or, bring homemade cookies or something if you want to make friends. I definitely have been at a campfire in Bishop and had people just like walk up with, cookies or whatever and make friends with all the people at the campfire. And that is a good way to do it for sure. Good luck with your trip. Sounds fun. All right. Pretty short one today. So I'm going to yoink a couple questions from the Instagram AMA. I've been doing this most months now where before I record, I just drop a AMA box on Instagram and grab some of those questions. So I'll be a little bit quicker with these, I think, just so I can get to a couple of them. All right. This comes from Ryan on Rice. How do you keep stoked / motivated / train when autoimmune disorders flare? So I don't actually have a diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder. I just have, my body just makes a lot of noises in that regard, to the bafflement of my rheumatologist and other doctors. But all that to say, I don't think I actually have anything where I would use the word flare. I just have increases in my allostatic load where I feel like shit, and maybe some people would use the word flare for that. But I can definitely cause that, just by training hard or work getting too stressful and things like that. Whereas I think with a lot of true autoimmune flares, those things can be triggering events. I think that's quite common, but also sometimes you just don't know what the triggering event is, and then you're in it. So for me, I'm just always auto-regulating. This may surprise a lot of people, but I don't really stick to a rigid training schedule, even when I'm in a training block. I know what things I'm trying to accomplish. I know what sessions are going to be my primary sessions, but I may do 3 climbing sessions and 2 lifting sessions one week, and then do 1 lifting session and 1 climbing session the following week, and I'm still training. In fact, I think people radically underestimate how valuable that approach can be. It's been incredibly valuable for me because I'm just not backsliding all the time due to fatigue. So auto-regulating your volume, and by that I mean just changing how much stuff you do based on how you feel, is your number one tool in the toolbox for sure. And that's about it. Most of the other management of when things don't feel good is direct stuff related to why you don't feel good. So changing your diet, going to bed earlier, dealing with the stresses in your life, taking time to, maybe you don't train in order to reduce your volume, but you do something healthy, like go for a 1-hour walk, because that's like easier on the body and it's going to help the mental health strain and all that stuff. There are all those sort of strategies, but there's nothing special about those for training for climbing. Really, the training for climbing piece is just managing your volume. That really is 98% of the battle of progressing if you have constrained volume to work with. Good question. Okay. Jackbug Nugster asks, how has coaching changed your views on climbing? I answered a question like this a couple months ago, I want to say, but my answer off the top of my head is I'm just, compared to 6 years ago when I started, I'm just a way more compassionate person. I care so much more now about other people's climbing, and I care about all levels of climbing, and I care about all types of climbing. And it's just been so easy to slip into that and to see what that's like and to enjoy it and embrace it. Like I just ran a top out clinic this weekend, which I've been doing about once a year for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's just so fun to go from meeting all these people. I have no idea what their climbing's like, and then kind of getting to see them climb and talking to them and learning about their climbing. And in some cases, seeing them go from really gripped and not being sure what to do to actually feeling confident and feeling like ready to try a hard top out within the span of like 4 or 5 hours. It's just incredibly compelling. And I could run that clinic if I was 65 years old. So I think it's something that I hope to do for a long time. And similar things like that. I do coach in person, and it's just been a wonderful change for my own climbing to like experience that other side of it. Maybe one other answer would be that my own climbing is still very important to me, and I still do perform at a really high level, but this coincides with becoming a parent. I think I'm learning how to let go and how to be chill when I realize that something is too much or too taxing. And coaching has really helped me do that, because I've just coached so many people who burn themselves out because they just want it so bad. And just wanting it does not get you the thing that you want. So I struggle with that. I know a lot of other climbers struggle with it too. And just seeing it all the time has really reinforced for me how important it is to just try to maintain a positive relationship with the sport. And sometimes that means pulling back on how hard you're going. Forest Fox 98 asks, do you think visualizing is a necessary step for limit projecting? Yes, I think if someone can climb a really hard boulder and they're not doing any visualization of any kind, then they could climb harder if they did visualize. So if it's going to be at your limit, we're talking genetic potential, absolutely visualization is part of it. I just can't imagine any other sport where someone would be, at, like, for instance, the Olympic level and not do any visualization whatsoever. We would never think that that person was at the absolute cutting edge of what they were capable of. Maybe those people exist. I'm not sure, actually. That'd be a really hard thing to study, but maybe there's some science on it. So yeah, if you don't visualize, start practicing. All right. That's all the questions for this month. Thanks, everybody. Great questions as always. And I will see you back here for the June edition. I think it'll be a live from the Forest of Squamish edition. Should be fun. Have a great month. Thanks, everyone.